I still remember the sound that door made, a soft, hollow creak that shouldn't have carried so much pain. For years, my husband forbade me from entering that small, quiet house on the edge of our property. He called it his space, said it was where he went to think, to write, to breathe. And like a good wife, I respected that. Until the day he died, and I finally turned the key. That door didn't just open to a room, it opened to the truth about the man I thought I knew. I was married to Charles for 32 years. He wasn't a perfect man, but he was my man, the kind who still brought me coffee every morning, who kissed my forehead before bed even when we were tired of each other's company. We raised 2 children together, built a home with our own hands, and survived more storms than I could count. To anyone looking from the outside, we were the kind of couple people whispered about in church. They've got it figured out. But the truth is, you never really know what's buried beneath. The routine of love. Our days were simple. Morning smelled like coffee and warm buttered toast. I'd sit by the kitchen window watching the sunlight spill over the garden while Charles read his newspaper, glasses sliding down his nose. He'd hum softly, sometimes that old Al Green song we danced to the night we met. It was quiet, predictable, safe. Except for that one rule, the house. It sat behind our main home across a small patch of oaks. Not big, not fancy, just a 1-story cottage he built years ago with his own hands. When I asked about it, he'd smile that gentle smile and say, "That's my thinking place, Ruth. A man needs somewhere to talk to himself." It became why he'd changed the subject, and I, believing in trust, never pressed further. It became almost part of our rhythm, him disappearing for hours, sometimes days, into that house, returning calmer, quieter, as if he'd been washed clean. He never looked angry when he came back, never distant. Just different. And so I let it be. Because love, I thought, meant not asking too many questions. Charles passed away on a Thursday morning, heart attack. Out mowing the lawn, the sun still low, the air heavy with the smell of cut grass. When the neighbor found him, I was inside folding laundry, humming along to the radio, thinking about what to make for dinner. By the time I reached him, he was already gone. One hand on the mower handle, the other over his heart. He looked peaceful. Almost too peaceful, was a blur of casseroles and condolences. Our children, Maria and James, flew in, did what they could, then returned to their lives, leaving me with a house that suddenly felt too quiet, too organized, too intentional. Every corner smelled like him. Every drawer had traces of his tidy habits. Cufflinks lined perfectly, handkerchiefs folded with precision. Even the books on his nightstand stacked in descending order of thickness. It was only after the third eek of silence that I noticed the key. A small brass key taped under his desk drawer. Old, worn smooth from years of use, and the moment I held it, I knew exactly what it opened. Way, the secret house. But grief does strange things to a person. Instead of running there immediately, I sat with that key in my palm for 2 days straight, turning it over, whispering questions to it. Was it love that kept me out all those years, or was it fear? Did I truly trust him? Or was I just too afraid of what I might find? I waited until Sunday afternoon, the kind of day Charles used to love. The air was warm, the cicadas humming, the smell of honeysuckle drifting from the fence line. And as I walked across the yard toward that little house, my heart pounded in my throat like a trapped bird. Part of me expected to feel his presence there, that calm, gentle energy that always surrounded him. But as I reached the porch, the air felt heavier. Not evil. Just full of something unspoken. The windows were tight. Curtains drawn. Dust coated the sill. For a moment, I almost turned back, because some truths I think should die with the people who kept them. But love makes you brave, even in grief. Abry, so I turned the key. Abry, the door opened with a sigh, like it had been waiting for me, and inside, everything looked untouched, as though he'd stepped out just yesterday. A wooden desk sat in the center, papers neatly stacked, a single lamp beside it. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with journals, ledgers, photo albums, and on the far wall, a collection of framed pictures I'd never seen before. At first glance, I thought they were old family photos. But when I looked closer, my breath caught. They weren't our family. Not entirely. There was Charles, yes, younger, smiling, but beside him was a woman I didn't recognize, holding a baby in her arms. And that's when my world tilted. I stood there staring at that photograph, the edges of it curling slightly from age. The woman had kind eyes, so fty and tired, like someone who'd loved deeply and lost even deeper. She looked around my age now, and the child, maybe 2 years old, dark curls, a shy little smile. On the bottom corner, in my husband's handwriting, were 4 words that made my knees weaken. My family, my heart. I don't remember sitting down, but I must have. When I came back to myself, I was on the floor, clutching that frame like it could give me answers. My heart thudded painfully. My mind screamed, no, this can't be right. But my hands, they already knew. That house wasn't a thinking place. It was a life. One he'd built quietly, lovingly, without me. I stayed in that little house until the sun dipped low and the shadows turned long. I remember the smell of old paper, cedar, and something faintly sweet, maybe her perfume still clinging to the air after all these years. It felt like standing inside someone else's memory. Except that memory had my husband's face. I placed the photograph back on the desk, my hands trembling so badly I could barely keep it upright. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call someone, anyone, just to hear another voice, to ground myself in something real. But instead, I just sat there, staring at the neat rows of books, the pens lined up by color, the tiny glass vase on the windowsill holding a single dried rose. That's when I saw the journals. Said dozens of them, leather-bound, stacked so carefully they almost looked sacred. The earliest one, read 1998. The latest, 2022, the year before he died. I reached for the one in the middle. 2007. It opened easily, no lock, no hesitation, like he'd meant for someone to find it someday. His handwriting filled every page, neat and deliberate. The first entry began with words that will never leave me. I never meant for it to happen, but once it did, I couldn't stop caring for them. For them. Not her. Them. I read on, my eyes burning with disbelief. He wrote about a woman named Elaine. A widow he met while volunteering at the local shelter. She'd lost her home, was raising a little boy alone, trying to get back on her feet. He helped her, quietly at first, money for rent, groceries, small repairs. Then one night she cooked him dinner to say thank you. And that was where the lines blurred. Each page read like a confession without apology. He wrote of guilt, yes, but not remorse. He wrote about how he felt alive again, how being around Elaine and her son Ethan reminded him of a simpler kind of love. He called them his second light. Yet. He never left me. He never stopped coming home. He lived between 2 worlds, the husband I thought I knew and the man who lived in this hidden house. The truth was quiet, careful, and cruelly kind all at once. I turned another page. There was a photo tucked inside. Charles sitting in that same cottage, holding the little boy on his knee. The caption read, Ethan's first day of school. My hands shook so hard I dropped it. It fluttered to the floor, face down, and when I picked it up, something else slipped out from the back cover. A letter, sealed in an envelope with my name, written across the front. Shabber. Aurnatani Burbo 5 Abrook formal distant, like he wasn't sure if he still had the right to call me by name. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, closed the journal and leaned back, staring at the ceiling as tears slid silently down my cheeks. How long had he lived like this? How many anniversaries, how many Christmas dinners, how many quiet nights had I spent beside a man who'd split his heart in two? For the first time in my life, I felt like a guest inside my own marriage. That night, I couldn't sleep. The bed felt too big, the air too heavy. Every sound, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, the rustle of the trees, pressed against my chest like a confession waiting to be spoken. I tried to convince myself there was an explanation, that maybe Elaine and the boy had just been people he helped out of key. Indie-ness. Hebrew. But that word, family, echoed in my mind like a bell I couldn't unring. Family. Echoed in my mind a decision. If my husband could hide it, this time prepared. I brought a box of gloves, envelopes, and a notebook of my own. If there was a truth buried here, I was going to find it piece by piece. Hebrew. The second journal I opened was from 2015. The entries were shorter, less emotional, but filled with details. Names of schools, doctor visits, birthdays. Ethan was growing up. Charles had helped pay for his education. He'd attended his school plays, his graduations, his baseball games. Every milestone of a boy I'd never known existed. Then something changed. In the 2019 journal. The tone grew darker. Elaine is sick again. The doctors say it's spreading. It's spreading. Ethan doesn't know yet. I don't know how to tell him. My throat tightened as I read those words. I didn't hate her. Not theft. Because I could almost see her. Frail. Frightened. Trying to stay strong for her son while depending on the man who was supposed to be mine. She asked what will happen when she's gone. I told her I'll always look after him. That's a promise I intend to keep. Because in the later pages, the entries stopped being about her and became entirely about Ethan. The final journal, 2022. He wrote only once that year, 1 week before his heart attack. He's a fine young man now. I'm proud of him. I hope one day, if Ruth ever finds out, she'll understand that love doesn't always fit neatly into one home. That's when I finally opened the letter. Inside was his handwriting, shakier than before. Dearest Ruth. My dearest Ruth, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Please know I never meant to deceive you. I only meant to help someone who needed me, and somewhere along the way, that help became love of another kind. Not the kind that replaced you, but the kind that extended the boundaries of my heart. There's something I left for you and for him. It's in the drawer below this letter. Forgive me if you can. Love, Charles. My fingers fumbled with the drawer latch. Inside was a small box. Inside the box, a deed to a piece of land and another envelope, labeled for Ethan. That's when I realized my husband hadn't just kept a secret. He'd left behind another life. And a young man who had no idea the man he called Uncle Charles was actually his father. I don't remember the drive home that evening. The roads blurred into gray streaks. The radio played softly, and yet my mind was miles away, still sitting in that quiet cottage, staring at a letter that changed everything I thought I knew about love, marriage, and honesty. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickered on automatically. That house, the one Charles and I built together, the one that had hosted birthdays, arguments, anniversaries, and long silences, felt smaller now, almost claustrophobic. Eberk L. Ike, its walls had been keeping a secret too. Aber. I sat in the car a long time before going inside. When I finally did, I went straight to our bedroom. Brie, his side of the closet, still smelled faintly of cedar and aftershave. I stood there, staring at the empty space where his shoes used to be, and whispered into the quiet, Charles. Why, Charles? Why couldn't you just tell me? But of course, the silence had no answer. Brie, for days I did nothing. I'd go through the motions, making tea, watering plants, attending church, but inside it was like I was walking through fog. Everyone thought I was grieving his death. Ebro, and in a way, I was. Ebro, but not for the man who died. But for the one I thought I'd known. Still, that letter, that name, Ethan, it wouldn't leave me. Eberkry, I needed to see him, to look into the face of the boy my husband had written about like he was his own flesh and blood. Heberi, because he was. I started with the deed. Iber. It was for a small plot of land on the outskirts of town, just a few acres with a modest house on it. Eber underneath, his signature, and under that, another, Ethan Parker. Eberkry, I found him through the county registrar's office. He wasn't hard to locate. He worked at an auto shop downtown. A mechanic, 24 years old. I called once, but hung up before the first ring ended. Then I sat for an hour at the kitchen table, staring at the phone, until I finally said aloud, if he's part of Charles, then he's part of me too. Brewery. So I went. It was a warm Thursday afternoon, the kind where the air hums with distant heat and the smell of oil and rubber clings to everything. The shop wasn't big. A few bays, a cluttered office, the sound of tools echoing against concrete. When I stepped inside, a young man looked up from under the hood of a car, wiping his hands on a rag. Sabra and I froze, because I saw him, the resemblance. Brie, the same sharp jawline, the same furrow in his brow when he focused, even the same gentle patience in his movements. He had Charles's hands. Heberker. Can I help you, ma'am? He Ked, polite, his voice soft with that easy southern rhythm. Eberka, I swallowed hard. You're Ethan Parker? Eberk, yes ma'am, that's me. Ebra, I could barely speak. I knew your mother, Elaine. Abr. His expression softened. Oh, you did? You must have known her from the shelter days. She talked about a few good people who helped her back then. Oh. I nodded slowly, my throat tight. Ebrahis, your mother was a kind woman. Kshar, he smiled, that same half-smile Charles used to give when he didn't know what to say. Something inside me broke and healed all at once. We talked for a few minutes, about his work, his mother, how she'd passed a few years back. He spoke with pride and love, his words full of warmth. He told me Charles had helped him once, long ago. He was like family, he said. I called him Uncle Charles. He used to visit every month, always checked in, gave me advice, said I reminded him of someone he used to know. Brie. Then he laughed softly. Funny thing, huh? Through tears I couldn't stop. Yes. Very funny. He looked at me, puzzled for a moment, then kind. Are you all right, ma'am? Brie. I will be, I whispered. I just had to see you. I left before I said too much, before I ruined the picture he had, the kind man who helped him, no strings, no shame. I wanted to protect that memory even if it was built on a secret. Ebru, because in his eyes Charles had been something good, and maybe that's all that mattered now. Bree. But when I got home that night, I couldn't shake the thought that I was holding two halves of the same story, and only I knew how they fit together. So I wrote to Ethan, a letter of my own. Dear Ethan, I met your mother once. She was a wonderful woman, strong, gentle, full of grace. I wanted you to know that Charles cared for you deeply. Everything he did out of love. You don't owe anyone an explanation for the past. Just live well and know that somewhere there's someone who's proud of you, not just because of who you remind me of, but because of who you are. W. Ith warmth. Ebrica Ruth. Ebrica, I sealed it, left it unsigned, and mailed it to his shop the next morning. Ebrica, it wasn't closure, not yet, but it was a beginning. Weeks passed. The days grew quieter, and little by little I started to feel something I hadn't in months. Peace, not the kind that erases pain, but the kind that lets you breathe beside it. Until one morning I found a letter in my mailbox. Dear Mrs. Thompson, I don't know how you knew my mother or Uncle Charles, but your letter meant a lot. He used to talk about you sometimes. Said you were strong. Said you kept him grounded. I think he wanted both of you to be happy. If you ever want to visit the land he left, you're always welcome there. With respect, Ethan. I sat at the kitchen table, the morning sun spilling across the paper, and I cried. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd finally understood. Love isn't always perfect. Sometimes it takes shapes we can't see until it's too late. But it still leaves traces in gestures, in let. As seen sons who grow up to carry their father's hands. And that, I realized, was enough. It was early spring when I finally decided to go. The mornings were still cool, the sky pale and quiet, and the air carried that faint sweetness that comes before the trees bloom again. Ethan's letter had sat on my mantel for weeks. Every time I passed it, my eyes lingered on that last line. If you ever want to visit the land he left, you're always welcome there. At first, I told myself there was no reason to go. The house had already given me enough heartache. But as days turned into restless nights, I started to feel a quiet pull, not from curiosity, but from something deeper. Closure, maybe, or grace. So one Friday morning, I packed a small bag, filled a thermos with coffee, and drove back down that same lonely road where my husband's secret life had lived and breathed without me. The drive felt different this time. The fear was gone. In its place was something tender, a willingness to see the truth for what it was, no longer as a wound, but as a part of my story. When I reached the old gate, the sun was just climbing over the trees. The grass was taller now, and wildflowers had begun to sprout along the path. The house still stood quiet, its paint faded, its windows watching me like old eyes that remembered too much. I parked, stepped out, and just listened. The wind rustled through the branches, a distant bird called, and for the first time since Charles's death, I felt his presence. Not as a ghost, but as a memory that didn't hurt anymore. I walked up the porch steps and turned the doorknob. This time, I didn't hesitate. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The small living room looked the same, neat, sparse, simple, but now I noticed details I'd missed before. A Bible on the shelf with frayed pages, a small carved box on the side table, and a photograph tucked into its frame. It was of Charles. Younger, smiling, and beside him, Elaine holding a bab. Why? I picked it up gently, running my thumb over the glass. It wasn't anger that came. It was sorrow. Not for what they'd done. They must have tried to love in silence. There was a soft knock on the open door. I turned, startled, and there he was. Ethan, standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets, the sunlight catching in his hair. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said, a little shyly. Rawlison shyl faintly. April, I wasn't sure either. Brr. He stepped inside, his boots quiet on the wooden floor. Wooden floor. Ibri. I come here sometimes, he said. Helps me think. It feels peaceful, you know? I nodded. Yes, I can see that. We stood there in silence for a while, just two people bound by one man's choices, neither of us quite knowing what to say. Finally, I too, a deep breath. Ethan, I said softly, do you know why he kept this place from me? He hesitated, then nodded slowly. He didn't want to hurt you. He told me we're his home. That he'd already caused enough pain in his Ife. He said if you ever found out, he hoped you'd understand that it wasn't about betrayal. It was about guilt. Asian. I swallowed hard, my eyes blurring. Did he love her? Ethan looked down. Mercy's shared for her. Hirsa her. But he loved you. I think that's why he never told you. He didn't know how. It broke something open in me, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't bitterness. It was release, because maybe, after all those years, I finally understood the man I'd shared a life with. We talked for a while longer, about his childhood, about his mother, about how Charles had quietly paid for his schooling. When he spoke, I could hear echoes of my husband in his voice, the patience, the thoughtfulness, even the quiet humor. Before I left, Ethan handed me something. He have this for you. A small key, tarnished and old. Key bro. He left this for you, he said. It's for that box on the table. He told me once that it belonged to his wife. Said one day you might need it more than he did. I opened it after he left. Broker in Sid. Were only two things. A folded letter and a gold locket. The letter was dated just weeks before his death. His handwriting trembled slightly, but it was unmistakably his. My Ruth, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I can only pray you found this in time to forgive me. I was never good at speaking the truth when it came to pain. I carried too many of them, thinking silence was mercy. The house, the boy, they were part of a mistake I made long before I learned how to love you the way you deserved. I tried to do right by both of you, and in doing so, I failed you both. If I could have one more day, I'd tell you that you were my heart, Ruth. Every quiet morning, every Sunday meal, every laugh we shared, that was my real home. A locket is yours. Inside, I kept a picture of you and me, and another of the boy, so that even in my sins, I carried my truths together. Forgive me if you can. Charles. My hands trembled as I opened the locket. On one side, a tiny photo of us from our wedding day. On the other, a faded image of Elaine and baby Ethan. Two halves of his life, finally side by side. I closed it and held it to my chest. And in that quiet house, the one that had once been a secret, I finally forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because I needed to be free. As I locked the door behind me, I turned back one last time. The house looked softer now, warmer. Almost like it was exhaling after years of holding its breath. I whispered into the wind, "Rest easy, Charles. I understand now." And as I walked away, I felt lighter. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I'd learned to carry the truth with grace instead of pain. When I came back from Oak Ridge, I thought I'd leave the past where it belonged, sealed behind that quiet wooden door, resting in peace with the man who built it. But life has a strange way of bringing buried truths to the surface. It doesn't matter how gentle your heart's intentions are, once a secret breathes, it finds its way to oath. Ears. It started small, whispers really. At the church during Sunday coffee hour, I noticed the change first. Ibrahim, Mrs. Lambert, who usually greeted me with a smile, just nodded this time, her eyes sliding away a little too quickly. Then there were the phone calls that rang once and stopped. The neighbors who, all of a sudden, found something fascinating on the other side of the road when I waved. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself it was just my imagination. But when Pastor Green stopped by that Wednesday evening, hat in hand and face tight with concern, I knew the story had grown wings. "Ruth," he said softly, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, "I don't want to pry, but there's been talk about Charles, about another family." Bergkrom. I set down my cup of tea, my fingers trembling just slightly. "Ah, I see," I said, keeping my voice calm. "And what exactly are they saying?" "That he kept a house, that there's a boy, that you went there yourself." I sighed and nodded. "Pastor, it's true." He blinked, caught off guard by how easily I said it. "Hebrew, I see," he murmured, eyes softening. "And how are you holding up?" I smiled faintly. "Better than people expect me to." "Zebrig at secrets. That's the thing about secrets. Once they're out, people scramble to assign blame. Some pitied me. Others judged me for staying with him all those years, for not knowing. A few even called it my fault, whispering that perhaps if I'd been a more attentive wife, Charles wouldn't have strayed. But I had learned something standing in that quiet house, something those whispers couldn't touch. "Hey, Brewer, the truth doesn't ruin you, it refines you." 2 weeks later, I decided to attend Sunday service again. Walking into that church took courage I didn't know I had. The pews felt the same. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and lilies, but I could feel the tension ripple through the room like a breeze before a storm. I took my usual seat, front row, second pew from the left. A few eyes followed me. Few mouths tightened, but I kept my chin up. Tiber. When the choir began to sing Amazing Grace, something inside me loosened. It was during that song that I felt a presence behind me. Whoa, a hand, light and hesitant, touched my shoulder. I turned, and there was Ethan. He had come. Hebrew, not to hide, not to explain, just to stand beside me. He looked nervous, but when our eyes met, he smiled. And without a word, he sat down next to me. Brumber. That moment changed everything. People began to whisper again, but this time it wasn't cruel, it was confused. Who was this young man sitting beside me? Why did I look so calm, almost peaceful, next to the living proof of my husband's secret life? After the service, as we stood outside the church, Mrs. Lambert, the same woman who'd avoided my gaze weeks before, approached. "Ruth," she said gently, "is that Abru?" "Yes," I interrupted softly. "That's Ethan. He's Charles's son, and he's my family now too." Her eyes widened then softened. "Yebriker." "Well," she murmured, "that's airy kind of you." I smiled. "It's not kindness, Mrs. Lambert. It's truth, and I'm too old to fight the truth anymore." Brew. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in our small town. The gossip slowly faded. Ethan began helping me around the house, fixing the porch, trimming the hedges, even repainting the old fence Charles had always meant to replace. Some evenings we'd sit on the porch swing, sharing stories about the same man we both knew differently. He told me how Charles taught him to fish at a nearby lake. Brekkie. I told him how Charles used to hum when he cooked Sunday breakfast. We discovered that, in some ways, we had both loved the same version of him, the gentle, patient man who never quite forgave himself. And strangely enough, that realization brought peace to both of us. But peace doesn't come without consequence. Charles's will had to be updated through probate court, and the matter of inheritance resurfaced. Some relatives, cousins mostly, the kind who only appear when the Rees property involved, began to argue that Ethan had no legal claim. Hebrew 1 even said, "That boy's a reminder of sin, Ruth. Let the past stay buried." I looked her in the eye and said quietly, "The past is buried. I'm the one living with what remains, and what remains deserves dignity." I made sure Ethan got what Charles left him, the land on Oak Ridge and enough savings to start his own life. It was the least I could do, not out of obligation, but out of compassion. When the paperwork was done, I walked home alone under a sunset that painted the sky in deep orange and gold, the kind of sunset that feels like forgiveness wearing color. Hebrew in town, they eventually stopped talking. People moved on as they always do. He. But sometimes, when I'd walk through the grocery store or attend Sunday service, a stranger would stop me and say, "Eber, I heard what happened. You handled it with grace." "Bro," and I'd smile, because grace was all I had left to give. That's the strange beauty of truth. When it first a case. It destroys everything, your image, your peace, your memories. But if you sit with it long enough, it begins to rebuild you. Stronger, quieter, and freer than before. There's a kind of quiet that comes after a storm, not silence exactly, but something gentler. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I started each morning with a cup of tea on the porch, watching the sun climb over the oak trees. It wasn't the same house Charles had left behind. It was mine now, fully and freely. The ghosts that once lingered here, questions, doubts, unspoken fears, had softened into memory. Ethan came by often, but always knocked first. I liked that about him. He never assumed. Sometimes he'd bring flowers from his mother's old garden, other times just sit and talk. There was no tension between us anymore, no unspoken weight. We had both accepted the truth, and in doing so, had freed each other from its grip. One after. Noon, as we sat under the willow tree, Ethan asked me something that stayed with me. "Do you think he loved us both, Mrs. Ruth?" I took my time before answering. "Yes," I said quietly, "but not the way we needed him to. Charles was a man torn between duty and desire. He didn't know how to live with both. So he built two worlds and hoped they'd never meet." Ethan nodded slowly. "I think he was afraid." "He was," I said, "afraid of being seen for who he truly was. But fear doesn't excuse pain. It only explains it." We sat there for a long time after that, not needing words. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle, the wind moving gently through the leaves. It was one of those rare moments where understanding felt enough, where no one needed to win or forgive, only to exist side by side. Forgive, only to exist. As the months passed, I found new rhythms to my days. I joined a local reading circle at the library, started teaching a few children how to sew on weekends, and began tending to my garden again. There's healing in dirt and daylight, in watching something grow after everything else has fallen apart. My neighbors began to see me differently too. Not as the woman who'd been betrayed, but as the woman who endured, and though I never sought admiration, their kindness warmed me in quiet ways. An extra slice of pie at the market, a wave from across the street, a simple, "How are you doing?" That actually waited for an answer. Then one day I decided to visit Oak Ridge again. One last time. The house still stood there, tucked behind the trees, silent and still. I didn't go inside this time. I just stood in the yard looking at it from a distance. The air smelled of pine and dust. A bird chirped somewhere in the distance. I realized that the house no longer frightened me. It was no longer a symbol of betrayal. Just a place that once held love, mistakes, and secrets. I whispered, "Goodbye, Charles," and meant it. Not goodbye in bitterness, but in rel. Ease. Ibryi. Then I turned, got into my car, and drove away without looking back. Back home, I hung a new photo on the living room wall. One Ethan had taken of us on the porch, both smiling, sunlight washing over our faces. Abru. It wasn't the image of a broken family. It was something else entirely, something stronger. Ibra-free. Because family, I've learned, isn't always built by blood or vows. Sometimes it's built by truth and the courage to stand in it. As the years went on, I grew softer with time. I no longer asked why things happened as they did. Abru, the answers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the peace I'd found in myself, a peace that no secret, no lie could ever take away again. I forgave Charles, not because he deserved it, but because I did. Holding on to anger would have kept me tied to the same pain that once broke me, and I had lived too long to let that be the ending to my story. Sometimes in the evenings I'd still talk to him, not out of longing, but out of habit. Brr, I'd say, Charles, I hope you found your peace. I finally found mine. Ibrahim, and maybe, just maybe, somewhere beyond the veil of this life he hears me. Ibri, but if not, that's all right too. Some words are meant to echo only in the heart that speaks them. When I look back now, I don't see myself as a woman who was deceived. I see a woman who walked through fire, quietly, deliberately, and didn't let it turn her to ash. Charles's secret house, his hidden life, his silence. Shibri, they used to haunt me. But I realize now, they were just mirrors, showing me the parts of myself I'd forgotten. Abra had the strength I didn't know I had, the peace that only comes when you stop needing every answer to make sense. I used to ask, why did he do this to me? Ibri for now, and now I ask, what did it teach me? Roa, and that has made all the difference, because sometimes isn't about staying or forgiving or fixing what's been broken. Sometimes love is about walking away with grace, knowing you gave everything you could and still choosing yourself in. The end. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening, it's this. Ibri, don't be afraid to open the door to your own truth, even if it hurts. Because behind every secret, every heartbreak, there's something waiting to be found. I.e., not always answers, but strength. And maybe that's what we're all looking for in the end. Hebrahi, would you have opened that door? Hebrew? If you knew what waited behind it, tell me in the comments. And if my story touched your heart, subscribe for more real stories. Ibrahim, from women who've learned that sometimes the hardest truths lead to the deepest peace.